Hello everyone, I am Mr. Disturbing and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? If you want even deeper chills. My new channel is waiting for you. The link is down in the comments. Now, get comfortable and relax. The trail vanished somewhere between the second ridge and what should have been the creek crossing. I'd been hiking these Appalachian mountains for 15 years, but the fog had rolled in thick as wool, and every familiar landmark had become a stranger. That's when I saw the cabin. It squatted in a clearing I'd never noticed before, its timber walls dark with age and rot. The roof sagged like a broken spine, and weeds choked the foundation. But something about it felt wrong, too deliberate, too hidden, like it was waiting. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges, and inside the air tasted of damp earth and something older. Decay, maybe, or something that had never been alive to begin with. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the walls, casting thin bars of light across the floor. The floorboards creaked under my boots, each step echoing in the silence. That's when I saw the bones. They weren't scattered randomly. Someone had arranged them in perfect circles across the floor. Small animal skulls, rib cages, what looked like the delicate bones of birds. Each circle contained strange markings carved directly into the wooden planks. The symbols looked old, older than the cabin itself. They reminded me of the Cherokee petroglyphs I'd seen in museums, but these felt different, hungrier. The walls bore similar markings, carved deep into the timber. Long gouges ran between them, too deep and too regular to be from any animal I knew. The scratches started at eye level and swept down toward the floor, as if something had been dragged across the wood, again and again. In the corner sat a table, its surface stained black with something that wasn't water damage. Mason jars lined its edge, filled with what looked like dirt or ash. Each jar bore a paper label, but the handwriting had faded to illegible smears. The air above the table shimmered slightly, like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. That's when I noticed the trapdoor. It lay flush with the floor in the cabin's center, its edges barely visible beneath decades of grime. The wood around it was newer, darker, fresh. Someone had been maintaining this place. Recently, my hands shook as I pulled the heavy door open. The hinges moved silently, as if they'd been oiled. Below lay a dirt chamber, just deep enough for a man to stand. The walls were carved with more symbols, these deeper and more intricate than those above. They seemed to pulse in the dim light filtering down from the cabin. The smell hit me then. Rich earth, yes, but underneath it something else. Something sweet and cloying that made my stomach turn. At the bottom of the chamber, more bones formed elaborate patterns in the dirt. These weren't animal bones. I backed away from the trapdoor, my heart hammering against my ribs. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing closer. The silence outside had grown complete. No birds, no wind, no insects. Even my own breathing seemed muffled. I ran. The forest had changed. Trails I'd followed moments earlier were gone, replaced by dense undergrowth that tore at my clothes. The fog had thickened until I could barely see 10 feet ahead. Every tree looked the same. Every shadow held the same menace. The compass in my pack spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. Behind me something followed. Not footsteps exactly, but a rhythm in the silence. A presence that stayed just beyond sight, matching my pace. When I stopped, it stopped. When I ran, it followed. The fog seemed to part for it while growing thicker around me. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt broken in that gray half-light. I stumbled through brambles and over fallen logs, following what might have been a deer path or might have been nothing at all. The following presence never gained ground, never fell behind. It simply was, constant as my own shadow. Then suddenly, impossibly, I saw the road. The asphalt appeared through the fog like a miracle, and beyond it my truck sat exactly where I'd left it. I stumbled toward it, keys already in my shaking hands. The engine turned over on the first try, and I drove without looking back, tires spinning on the gravel shoulder. That was 3 months ago. I've studied every map, every hiking guide, every surveyor's chart of that area. I've talked to forest rangers and local historians. I've driven every back road within 50 miles of where I parked that day. The cabin doesn't exist. The clearing doesn't exist. According to every official record, that patch of forest is unbroken wilderness. But sometimes, late at night, I still smell that sweet, cloying scent from the chamber below. And when I check my hiking boots in the morning, there's always fresh mud on the soles, even though I haven't left the house. Last week, I found a symbol carved into the oak tree in my backyard. The same symbol I'd seen carved deepest in that dirt chamber. The bark around it was still bleeding sap, though the cut looked days old. I'm moving next month, somewhere far from mountains, far from forests. Somewhere the fog can't find me, but I know it won't matter. Some places leave marks that go deeper than memory, deeper than maps. The hollow knows where I am now, and whatever held its right in that forgotten chamber is patient enough to wait for me to return. I should have turned around the moment I saw that cabin. Should have trusted the feeling in my gut when the old metal key felt ice cold even in the summer heat. But I was tired, and the listing said it was available. So I paid the deposit and drove deeper into those West Virginia mountains than any sane person should go. The rental agent had given me directions scrawled on a napkin. Turn left at the dead oak, follow the gravel for 3 miles. Cabin's the only structure for 20 miles in any direction. He wasn't lying about that last part. When I finally pulled up to the place, it sat in a clearing like something that had grown there naturally. Weathered gray wood blending into the shadows of ancient pines that pressed close on all sides. Inside, everything smelled of wood rot and something else I couldn't name, something organic and stale. The furniture looked handmade, all of it scarred with deep gouges that could have been from decades of use or something else entirely. The floorboards groaned under my feet with every step, and I noticed gaps between some of the wallboards where cold mountain air whispered through even on that warm August evening. The first night passed quietly enough. I made a simple dinner on the old gas stove, read by lamplight, and went to bed early. It was sometime around midnight when I first saw the lights. At first glance, they looked like distant flashlights moving between the trees. Hikers, maybe, or hunters checking trail cameras. But as I watched from the kitchen window, something felt wrong about the way they moved. Too smooth, too deliberate, and completely silent in a forest that should have been full of night sounds. I counted 3 lights that first night, weaving between the pine trunks in patterns that made no sense. Sometimes they'd circle the cabin at a distance, never getting closer but never going away. Other times they'd stop completely, just hanging there in the darkness like unblinking eyes. By morning they were gone, and I almost convinced myself I'd imagined them. The second day, I found the journal. It was tucked between the couch cushions, leather cover cracked and pages yellowed. Most of the entries were mundane, weather observations, grocery lists, complaints about the isolation. But the last few pages made my skin crawl. The handwriting became increasingly erratic as I read. Whoever had written it described the same lights I'd seen, but with growing terror. They mentioned the silence that came with them, how the entire forest would go dead quiet when the lights appeared, how the lights seemed to respond to movement, getting brighter when you looked directly at them. The final entry was just 2 lines, written in what looked like a shaking hand. They don't come every night, but when the forest goes completely silent, don't look outside. They're waiting for you to look. I should have packed up and left right then. Instead, I stayed another night. The silence came just after 11 p.m. It was absolute. No wind, no insects, no distant owl calls. Even the cabin's usual groans and settling sounds stopped completely. The air itself felt thick and expectant, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. I forced myself to stay away from the windows, but I could feel something watching from the tree line. The lights were back, I was certain, though I couldn't see them. There was a quality to the darkness outside that felt occupied, crowded with presence. Then came the pressure against the walls, subtle at first, like a large animal brushing against the exterior. But it grew stronger, more deliberate. The cabin creaked and shifted as if something massive was pressing against it from all sides. The gaps between the wallboards widened slightly, letting in thin streams of that oppressive silence. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the center of the main room, as far from the windows as possible. The pressure continued until dawn, accompanied by a low humming that seemed to come from the earth itself. When the sun finally rose, everything returned to normal. Birds sang, wind rustled the leaves, and the cabin settled back into its usual rhythm of creaks and sighs. I packed my things and left within the hour. 3 weeks later, I received an email from someone claiming to be the actual property owner. They said they'd been getting strange reports about their old cabin and wanted to check if I'd experienced anything unusual. Attached was a trail camera photo taken the morning after my final night there. The image showed my car driving away down the gravel road, but it also showed something else. Fresh footprints circling the cabin in the mud, dozens of them. Barefoot impressions that started at the tree line and spiraled inward, stopping just short of the front door. The owner's final message chilled me to the bone. Their family had abandoned that cabin in 1987 after their grandfather disappeared one night. The county had condemned it years ago, and no one had legally rented it since. Now, whenever I see lights moving in the woods during my hiking trips, I turn away immediately. Because I learned that when they finally stop moving, when the forest goes silent and the lights just hover there in the darkness, they're not just watching anymore, they're waiting for someone to look back. The humming started on my third night in Uncle Jeremiah's cabin, rising from somewhere beneath the warped floorboards like a prayer sung by dead mouths. I should have left then. The inheritance came as a surprise, a crumbling one-room cabin perched on a ridge deep in the West Virginia mountains, accessible only by a logging road that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. My uncle had been a hermit, the family whispered, someone who'd chosen isolation over society after returning from Vietnam. The cabin sat in a hollow so narrow that sunlight only touched it for a few hours each day, surrounded by ancient pines that creaked and groaned even when no wind stirred their branches. The first thing I noticed were the symbols. They were everywhere, carved into the doorframe, scratched into the windowsills, etched deep into the support beams that held up the sagging roof. They weren't random scratches or graffiti. These marks had purpose, deliberate curves and angles that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Some were filled with what looked like old candle wax, others stained dark with something I didn't want to identify. I found Uncle Jeremiah's journals stacked beside a cold wood stove, their pages yellowed and brittle. His handwriting grew increasingly erratic as the entries progressed, starting with mundane observations about weather and wildlife before descending into rambling descriptions of sounds in the night, of whispers that seemed to seep through the floorboards. The final entries were mostly illegible, except for one phrase repeated over and over. The hollow sings its psalm. On that third night, I understood what he meant. It began as a low vibration, so faint I thought it might be distant machinery or wind through a cave system. But as I lay on the musty mattress Uncle Jeremiah had left behind, the sound clarified into something unmistakably human. Voices joined in a toneless chant that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. The words, if they were words, were in no language I recognized, yet they felt familiar, as if my bones remembered them from some ancestral dream. I pressed my ear to the floor and the humming grew stronger, more distinct. Multiple voices now, rising and falling in hypnotic rhythm. The floorboards vibrated against my cheek, and I could swear I felt breath seeping through the gaps between the planks, warm, stale air that tasted of copper and decay. Sleep came eventually, bringing dreams of shadowy figures moving through the cabin, their fingers tracing new symbols into the walls while that ceaseless chant continued. In the dream, I watched from the corner as they worked, their faces hidden but their purpose clear. They were marking territory, claiming something that had always belonged to them. I woke to find fresh scratches in the wood beside my bed, symbols that definitely hadn't been there when I'd fallen asleep. The humming had stopped, but the silence felt expectant, as if something were holding its breath. The pattern repeated for 5 more nights. Each evening, as full darkness settled over the hollow, the chanting would begin. Each morning I'd discover new carvings, always closer to where I slept. The walls themselves seemed to pulse during those midnight hours, the cabin breathing like a living thing around me. The temperature would drop until my breath misted, and sometimes I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, shadows that didn't match any object in the room. On the 9th night, I packed my truck and left before sunset, abandoning Uncle Jeremiah's belongings to whatever claimed that place. I drove straight through to my apartment in Charleston, windows down despite the October chill, trying to clear the taste of that stale breath from my lungs. But the hollow followed me home. Every night now, just as I'm drifting off to sleep, I hear it. That same toneless chant rising from somewhere beneath my floorboards, even though I live on the 14th floor. The sound is fainter than it was in the cabin, but it's growing stronger. New symbols have started appearing on my walls, scratched into the paint while I sleep. And sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, I feel warm breath seeping through the cracks in my bedroom floor, carrying whispers in that ancient, hungry language. I've stopped sleeping. I've stopped trying to understand. Because now I know the truth Uncle Jeremiah discovered in that hollow. Some places don't let you leave, not really. They mark you, claim you, make you part of their endless psalm. And now, every night, I hear that same hum growing closer, as if something is slowly climbing up from the depths, following the sound of my heartbeat home.